Take off my scarf.
No, it can actually be clipped onto your scarf if you don't mind. I don't want you to be cold. That's perfect. Jeff, I'm going to do the same for you. Just step over this. Really need a longer cable for that. I have a longer cable for it, just not right here.
Hey, Carol.
So, you guys have to take one here. 30 right size. Yeah.
Get up. I just want to take a picture.
All right.
I like getting up.
So I usually
Like lunch
I need to test the mics. Give me 1 second. Steph, give me a 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. And Steph, give me a 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Looks like. Thank you very much.
Great.
Ears. Just put this like, well, as long as we don't slam the table, which would be.
We need more affordable housing.
Affordable housing.
Slim our thighs.
So it looks like we've got about 8 people on Zoom.
Yes.
So they'll be able to ask questions. Assuming I can keep your TV plugged in. Not a guarantee.
Are you gonna have them unmute and ask questions?
That's probably the
Put it in the chat.
We can. I mean, in the chat I can relay, but when the time comes, we'll probably just have them unmute.
Okay. Do we have a specific end time?
We figured on doing about an hour, so give or take. People have places to be, but the overall recording could be only 15 minutes.
Okay. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take. If we get close to 45 or 40 minutes, and we haven't last one, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but really, unless we, and this is the one thing
Unplug it?
I can't quite reach around and unplug it because it's plugged in.
It would stay.
It's only an hour.
And then it won't run. Actually, you can turn it off. That little is on. I can't tell that's all right. I'm gonna get a snack. That'll do this. That's
Are you're recording on?
recording.
Set up.
It's very active.
You want me to? Sure. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to Books at B'ShERT. This is the second installment of our brand new book and podcast series. And we're very excited to have Jennifer Baum with us with her book, which is a memoir, right? Called Just City. Growing up on the Upper West Side when housing was a right. Human right. Human right. Are still close. And in conversation with her will be Jeff Levinson. Do you want me to say anything about you, Jeff?
Nah.
Jeff is a member of B'ShERT, a past president, and a heck of a guy.
Thank you. So welcome. I'll also welcome everyone. So to introduce Jennifer a little bit more, I want to use a Yiddish word that she uses several times in her prose, and a word that she used 20 minutes ago when we were chatting, and that is the word Hamish, to describe many people that she encounters. I would describe her new book, Just City, the same way as Hamish. It's homey, cozy, unpretentious. She describes growing up in publicly subsidized housing, RNA house, in the late 60s and 70s among family and neighbors in an atmosphere that dissolves the difference between the two. The warmth radiates from the page. Jennifer uses her personal story to illustrate the effect of housing policy on New York City's history and spirit. In an age where the election of, scare quotes, self-described democratic socialist, end scare quotes, Zoran Mamdani, has cost lots of hand-wringing, it is amazing to see the progressive and heavy-handed housing policies of post-war New York City, New York State, and America at large, and compare them to the modest goals of a potential Mamdani administration. Jennifer Baum is a woman of many talents. She's created award-winning short films, written articles for publications as diverse as the New York Daily News, the Jewish Observer Los Angeles, and Hip Mama. She's also worked as a teacher and an editor. Thank you for coming to our little temple to talk about your book.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking you to tell us about RNA House. What was it? Where was it? How did you end up there?
So RNA House still is on 96th Street between Amsterdam and Columbus, in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. It was built as part of the West Side Urban Renewal Area Plan in the 60s. We were the first family to move into the building. People knew about these Michelamas that were going up. They were ubiquitous. There was no scarcity of housing at that time. There was an abundance of subsidized housing. And so people on the Upper West Side knew about these buildings, and we got our name on we signed up and got in. It wasn't hard to get in at that time. Go ahead, sorry.
No, you go.
The RNA stands for Riverside Neighborhood Assembly, which was a civic organization on the Upper West Side. It was a democratic civic organization. There were a lot of these kinds of organizations on the Upper West Side at the time, and they were each sponsoring these kinds of co-ops. So our building was sponsored by Riverside Neighborhood Assembly. And initially the building was just for teachers. And my father at the time was a engineering professor. So we qualified. We qualified for subsidized housing. You had to have an income between a certain level. You couldn't make too much money or too little money to qualify. And that's how it happened.
So what is Mitchell-Lama housing?
So in 1955, the New York legislature passed the Mitchell-Lama Housing Act, which was kind of came off of the 1949 Housing Act, which was really the major piece of legislation that happened post-war, which was something that Truman instigated. He had this whole idea that, here we were rebuilding Europe with the Marshall Plan, while at the same time we didn't have enough housing in the US. And there was a lot of reasons for that. One of them was the Depression, and then there was the war. And so there was a dearth of housing. And so the 1949 Housing Act paid for public housing. There were a lot of other things that the 1949 Housing Act did. It was a very flawed kind of bill. It provided low-cost mortgages, but only to white people. So in some ways it was very progressive. It funded
public housing, NYCHA housing, but it also excluded a lot of people from the ability to buy homes. But so the 1955 Mitchell-Lama Housing Act kind of piggybacked off of the 1949 Housing Act. And that was an attempt, and it was a very successful project that funded middle income housing, which is what Mitchell-Lama housing is. It's geared to middle income and moderate income people, whereas NYCHA housing is geared to working class people.
I love that your house is called RNA house because RNA is related to DNA. And it was clear from reading your memoir that your housing project, your housing unit was part of the DNA of the neighborhood and really a part of who you grew up to be, your experience growing up there. Can you talk about how the Mitchell Lama programs in general affected the day-to-day living of the city in the Upper West Side when you were growing up?
Yeah, so Mitchell-Lama housing actually was built throughout Manhattan, throughout the other boroughs and outside of the city as well. What was interesting about the Upper West Side was that it was part of the West Side Urban Renewal Area Plan, which ran from 97th Street to 87th Street between Central Park West and Amsterdam Avenue. And there were so many buildings that were built like this that followed this model that it completely shaped the area between, on Amsterdam and Columbus, between, like I said, between 87th and 97th. It really, when you think about the Upper West Side today, if it hadn't been for Mitchell-Lama housing, as well as NYCHA housing and rent control, then the Upper West Side would be completely exclusive. There'd be no way to move there now. It really helps to create this very, thriving, diverse community. The kinds of families that moved in were really, they were sort of behind this agenda, this integrationist agenda. It was, the buildings were, my building was like the other Mitchell-Lama buildings. It was integrated. It, it was basically, everybody basically came from the same sort of socioeconomic background. There were people who were displaced by when these buildings were built, and there was a very strong concerted effort to make sure that people who were displaced got to move back into these buildings. That's how it was a little bit different from the sort of former urban renewal, Robert Moses kind of bulldoze and displace people and, good luck to them. This really made an attempt. It was sort of a more humane way to create urban renewal, and it did. It created this very vibrant life in this area. We were all connected. We played together in different buildings. We knew each other. We had co-ops together.
You described the original Housing Act as being enforcing segregation, and then your building became integrated. What was the process to move from segregation as a de jure, required by the law, to becoming something that went by the wayside by the time you and your family moved into the building?
Well, I mean, it wasn't the 1949 Housing Act, and the original NYCHA buildings were segregated. But then post-war, New York City actually desegregated NYCHA housing way before any other city in the country did. So, which is very impressive. Mitchell-Lama housing was never segregated. The flaw I was talking about in the 1949 Housing Act is that Black people of color were not allowed mortgages. So that's what created that sense of, this whole idea in this country of inherited wealth. You buy a house, it increases in value, you get to leave it to your kids. A whole generation of people of color were denied that opportunity. So that's really where the big flaw came in. But in terms of NYCHA housing, particularly in the city, it was pretty much from the start integrated, as was Mitchell-Lama housing.
You described before how the RNA House was sponsored by the Riverside Assembly, right?
Neighborhood assembly.
What does it mean to sponsor? Like, how does that work?
That's a good question. I don't really know exactly what, I don't really understand why these buildings had to be sponsored. I don't know. It was almost like they had, each building had its own kind of agenda. Our building was for teachers. That was the goal of our building. I don't, I don't really understand the mechanics of that. I don't know. I know that our building was part of stage 1 of the West Side Urban Renewal Plan, but I don't really understand why it had to be that way. Why didn't the city just put up buildings? Why did different civic organizations have to sponsor them? I don't know.
There were a lot of buildings that you talked about that were sponsored by unions, and there seemed to be a big connection between unions and affordable housing.
Yeah. Union housing created incredible numbers of subsidized housing. I think maybe more than Mitchell-Lama housing. That was also from Title I money. Robert Moses worked with Abraham Hazen to build union housing throughout the city, like Penn South, which is a big complex near Penn Station, right opposite FIT. That's union housing. And it's a similar model to Mitchell-Lama housing, but it was sponsored by unions, not civic organizations.
So how does Mitchell Lama housing work for the family, the individual that purchases or obtains the unit? Does it, how much do people pay? Does everybody pay the same? What happens when the residents of the apartment want to move or they pass away? Can you explain all of that?
So there are two types of Mitchell-Lamas. There are rentals and there are co-ops. So the kind of building I grew up in was a co-op. So we bought into the apartment. We bought a share or several shares of the apartment. We had a 3-bedroom. We got an apartment according to the size of our family. So I have a sister, so we got a 3-bedroom, and we paid maintenance according to the family income. So if you made, once you were in the building, if your income went up, then you paid a surcharge. But no one was thrown out because they made too much money, which I think is good because you don't want to incentivize people not to make money. And this way, if you pay a surcharge, you help to subsidize people who aren't paying as much. So it makes it more equal. There's no inheritance rights. So, I write a lot about in the book about how when my mother passed away, we had to give up the apartment, and it was devastating to us, like really, really devastating. We were the first people in the building. We felt like we owned the apartment, even though we knew really that we didn't, but we felt like we did. And it's really in New York City, it's the nicest place I've ever lived. And it's subsidized housing. It's a 3-bedroom with a terrace on the 14th floor, in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. I will never live like that ever again. It was, and we felt it was ours, and it's where I write about my father's death. And so the apartment had particular resonance for us because it's where we lived as a cohesive nuclear family. It was heartbreaking giving it up. And I really grappled with that, um, my sort of social justice values were, such that I believed that the next family on the wait list should get the apartment, but I didn't want to give it up because it was mine. And so I talk a lot about that in the book too. And that what a quandary that was. Not that I didn't have any way to hold on to it anyway. It was just, emotionally, intellectually, this is something that I really thought about. My mother was very, very, very against privatization, which is a trend that's happening with Mitchell-Lamas throughout the city, especially on the Upper West Side, or maybe not especially on the Upper West Side, but on the Upper West Side, because the neighborhood has become so Tony, you can make my apartment, you could probably make $2 million selling it now, at least. I don't know how much, but my mother was adamantly against privatization. She did not believe that people should make a profit on these kinds of apartments. These apartments were subsidized. Our family benefited from it. She believed that other families to come should benefit from it. And, she brought me up. She raised me. This is, how I was raised. And I agree with her intellectually. Emotionally, it was very, very hard to give up the apartment.
The second part of your book read as a thriller because you talked about the privatization votes that kept proceeding.
Right.
And the vote kept getting closer and closer. As of the publication date of your book, at least, the RNA House is still a subsidized public building.
Right. Knock on wood, it continues staying that way.
One thing I appreciated about your book is that you did give voice to people who supported privatization, or at least recognized some of the benefits of privatization. Can you talk about that debate?
It was really, I mean, in our building, it really tore the community apart. The community was it was very cohesive. We all grew up with this idea that we were part of a collective. We all basically had the same thing. We didn't envy people because they had more than us, and I just assumed that that's how people would continue to feel once as they got older. A lot, some of the kids I grew up with playing with have taken over their parents' apartments, and they voted for privatization, and it was really disturbing to me that they felt that way, that they just wanted to make money. And I can understand why people would want to make money. The way our society is set up, your apartment, like I said before, it increases in value and you can sell it, and that's often your retirement fund. The benefit of these kinds of buildings is that they become naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs. They're called NORCs, and people can retire in place. And there are social services. There are social workers who come in. There are blood pressure clinics. You don't need $3 million to go move to Florida. If you live in a Mitchell-Lama building. I did talk about there was when Gail Brewer was the Manhattan Borough president, she came and spoke at my building about during the height of the debate about whether, when one of the votes was about to happen about whether people want to privatize or not, she came out and spoke in favor of staying public. She's a big affordable housing advocate. And this Black man got up, who I'd known my whole life, whose kids I played with in the backyard, and he got up and said in front of everybody to Gail Brewer, how can you deny me, a Black man, the opportunity to make $1 million? And I understand that, I mean, he he didn't have the opportunity to have inherited wealth. And of course he's going to feel like that. Why wouldn't he feel that way, So you can see his perspective. But there were other Black people, other Black families in the building who didn't want it to privatize. He was in a certain, you had to be in a certain socioeconomic situation to support privatization, because privatization would mean that your costs would go up. So if the building were to privatize, maintenance charges would go up, taxes would go up, everything would go up. So he was in a position where he could afford privatization. Another Black family said to me, or said in the book as well, there are a lot of people on fixed incomes in this building. We don't want to privatize. We have a great situation now with Mitchell-Lama. And so no, leave us alone. You're harassing us by pushing privatization. So, I mean, I showed those sides. I also showed how, the communal nature of the building really was, with the fabric of the building was really sort of torn apart by money, it's money. It's like, yeah, who's not going to want to fight for, who's not going to want to make $1 million, right? So I tried to I tried to show all, many perspectives.
And you showed that privatization is not like a minting machine for everybody. There are people who are not going to be able to make a lot of money from privatization, right? Like you said, you need to have money to be able to then make the money from privatization.
Right, right, right.
Um, so we'll come back to more of the policy stuff. I just want to talk, there were some details in the book that you kind of just threw in there that took me off guard. And it might be because I'm, a square from the Midwest. That's where I grew up, but doing cocaine with one of your high school, not, I don't think it was you, but some people in your
No, it was me.
doing cocaine with one of your high school teachers was a
Right.
shocking
Right,
story.
right.
So there was a lot about this book that was not just, talking about housing policy, but talking about a time that is no longer here. Where there was a kind of the freedom of the 60s and 70s also had some potential consequences. Like I think that if we talked about a high school teacher doing drugs with his female students nowadays, it would have very different. We would look at it very differently.
Yeah,
Think
yeah.
about
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
that.
I mean, we were children of, our parents, it was laissez-faire parenting. Especially on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it was, we were left to our own devices. We were, neglected in many ways, but, we have a certain pride in that kind of sense of, that street smarts that we grew up with. Like I really tried to, I spent a lot of time talking about the landscape of growing up in the 60s and 70s on the Upper West Side. A lot of John was there. I knew John back there. He was also growing up on the Upper West Side at that time, so he can vouch for me. It was a very yeah, I mean, especially if you're like from you know, a liberal Jewish family. I mean, my mother was a single mother. She was off with her boyfriend in New Jersey. My sister and I were really just left to do whatever we wanted to do. And, we, there were a lot of great things about that and a lot of really bad things about that. So, yeah.
So let's open this up a little bit. John, what authority figures did you do cocaine with? So there was a couple there were many poignant parts of the book. One was when your friend, I think it was Nina, moved to West Hartford. And having now lived in New York myself for 25 years, I think it's a natural part of being a New Yorker is you make friends and then you see people leave. Did that happen? Now you've been on both sides of that equation. How did that feel watching people leave growing up, and then how did that feel for you when you left New York City?
Well, yeah, she was my best friend growing up in the building. We both moved into the building at the same time. My mother and her mother knew each other from Brooklyn. Um, our fathers were close. Nina was, after my father died and my mother went back to work, Nina's family was like a second family for me. Nina and I went to public school together. We walked down, we called it the pervert block. We walked down the block. To get, you know, a whole bunch of us walked down the block to PS 75 together as a group, and then we transferred to private school together. She was just she was a regular kid from subsidized housing who was then with me in private school. She really, she meant a lot to me. In public school, she also protected me from, I used to get beaten up in public school. I was the shortest, littlest one in the class, and Nina was not that much taller than me, but still bigger than me, and she would kind of protect me. So it was devastating when she moved. And also she moved to West Hartford, Connecticut, which seemed like another country, just it's like West Hartford, Connecticut, and she moved into a big house or it seemed like a big house, compared to my apartment. And it was just it was devastating. She, started doing things like wearing makeup and going to the prom and going to football games. And, we didn't do any of that. That was not anything that we grew up with. And so that was a real shock for me. It was a real blow when she left. Yeah, we did. I talk about how Nina and I took the boy test together. Which
eventually became a movie.
Yeah, I made a movie called The Boy Test. She and I knew back then that, the people who had the power were the boys, were the men. And so we came up with this boy test and we took a boy test together and we passed the boy test. Like we were really together. She and I would do things like we would hail taxis and scream "fuck you" to the taxi driver. We were together. We took the subway to Macy's. That was our first trip alone on the subway, was to Macy's and back. Like she was, and then she became a suburban kid. It was shocking. And then I left the city, but before I left the city, I noticed that the people that I really liked, who I met as a young adult before I left the city, were not from the city because they were so fresh and so friendly and so open. And so, it was just, and then it's like they would come to New York City because they had to experience the city, but they could never imagine actually staying, because who could actually raise a family in New York City, it's like, well, I was raised in New York City,
Thanks in part to
Mitchell-Lama housing, yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the subtitle of your book, a time when housing was a
It's human right. And
Yeah.
right, exactly. So and now, I've come back and I've been back for 3 years now. It was shocking at first to come back, really shocking. But I had enough connections with old friends and enough roots to kind of find myself back in the swing of things. It was not easy going when I first came back. But now I feel glad to be back, I think,
And that's going to be the topic of your sequel to this book,
Right.
Moving Back to New York, right? Okay.
No.
There was another poignant scene I want to talk about, and that is your interaction with the person you called Armand Argent. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was not his real name. His real name was similar to that. Name was Chris Cash. So I kind of played on that. It's Armand Argent. I thought that was I just didn't want to publicly, to the world. But anyway, he was a Black kid who went to my private school. And sometime in the 80s.
One of the few, from the description in the book, one of the few Black kids in private school.
Yeah. Sometime in the 80s, I was walking the East Village. It was really cold outside. And he came up to me and he was clearly homeless. He was not wearing shoes and he didn't really have a coat on. And, he was clearly homeless. And he said to me, "Hey, aren't you one of those Baum girls?" And he was like, "It's Chris Cash from your school." And then he said to me, "I'm so sorry about your father," because in the book, I talk about my father who basically drops dead in school. And so he says to me, "I'm so sorry about your father dying. What a trip, man. How are you girls doing?" And I was just sort of blown away that here he was homeless on a really cold night and that he could think about me like that. So it just stuck with me as a very like, and it he's homeless and I'm writing about housing and how everybody should have a home. And, it really, it was poignant. It was very poignant at the moment.
So I have to make an embarrassing confession. I didn't mean that to be quite the teaser it came out. When I was a kid, I saw West Side Story, and I've seen several productions since then. I lived in New York for 25 years. I never made the connection that the West Side in the West Side Story is the West Side of Manhattan.
What?
So you talk about the creation of Lincoln Center and what happened when they created Lincoln Center.
Yeah, I mean, that was if you go to Lincoln Center now, on the facade, there's banners that are kind of commemorate the people who got displaced. I don't know when those went up, but that's really striking to me that, there's this effort now to remember people who were displaced. There was a big, vibrant community of, I mean, the buildings were tenements, so they were probably very run down, but still, many, many people got displaced to build Lincoln Center.
Including the people who would have been characters in West Side Story.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's hard to imagine the Upper West Side without Lincoln Center. But at the time it was, there was no real, it was just, slum clearance, built, urban renewal. But like I said earlier, the West Side urban renewal area really tried to be more humane about making sure that people who were displaced got to move back into the neighborhood.
So, you use the term slum clearance, and I think that we don't always think about what exactly that means. What is slum clearance? I mean, it's almost a euphemism.
Well, it's very complicated because people are actually living in these buildings. They have lives, they have neighbors, their businesses, but also the buildings, many of them were substandard. They didn't necessarily have heat or hot water. They were slummy in a way. They were dilapidated. They weren't cared for. People were living, many people were living in very small quarters. So there was a reason why this happened. It didn't just happen out of nowhere. It wasn't like, just let's get rid of the slums. It was an effort to house people in a better situation. What I talk about in the book, about how many people, many Black and Puerto Ricans on the Upper West Side didn't want to move into the co-ops because they were living in tenement buildings, and that's what they knew. They didn't know about co-ops, and the Jews in the neighborhood were buying these co-ops up. I mean, even though they were subsidized, like my family bought our co-op for $3,800 in 1967. And Riverside Neighborhood Assembly and the other buildings in the neighborhood as well put out, they had tables like these on the street with flyers in Spanish to try to attract local Puerto Rican families, to try to explain to them what these co-ops were. Because they didn't want the co-ops to just be filled with Jews. They wanted it to be diverse. So there was a real outreach made to people in the neighborhood to bring them into these buildings.
So just switching gears slightly, I was really impressed reading the book about the level of research that you obviously did, and you talked about this in the acknowledgments. Did you enjoy getting down to the granular level of using architectural terms and talking about that? Was that an enjoyable part of the process of writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot.
What are some of the things that you learned in that perspective?
I learned more about brutalism. I learned about Le Corbusier and Tower in the Park housing. I learned about the history of, the housing movement in the city, how first people were living in tenements, and how, the housing reform movement, how people left the tenements.
What is brutalism?
Brutalism comes from a French word, béton brut, which means raw cement. So these buildings were made of raw cement, basically. So I learned about brutalist architecture. I grew up in brutalist architecture, sort of vaguely knew what that was, but I learned a lot more about what it was. I learned about Bauhaus, theory of the collective of building, living in buildings that create community based on the kind of apartment that you're living in. I learned a tremendous amount. yeah, I mean, I feel I don't have a PhD, but I feel like I should have a PhD, you know.
The amount of research that you did does definitely comes through, and you really do blend your personal stories, policy analysis, and championing, and historical perspectives. Did you do that in a systematic way as you were writing the book?
Well, I really didn't know what I was doing when I started the book. I really, really didn't know. I thought that my story was really interesting. My personal story of growing up, of going to public school and growing up in subsidized housing, and then transferring to private school and learning about class and the differences in class, and having my father drop dead in private school. Like, I thought that was in and of itself a really interesting story. But I thought to myself, who really is going to care about my story? Like, who cares about that, right? Um, and at the same time, I was always very, very fascinated with the kind of building I grew up in, because it's socialist. You know, you get an apartment according to the size of your family, and you pay maintenance according to your family income. So I always thought that was fascinating. And at some point, I thought I was going to make a film about it. Um, and so I was kind of torn between these two strands. Do I write about the building and um, the philosophy of the building, the history of Mitchell housing, or do I write about myself? And then I realized that the two stories were inextricably linked, that I was Mitchell housing. I mean, it's like that, it's who I am. It really, it, and so I started doing both. And then someone said to me, "You're writing a hybrid memoir." And I was like, "What's a hybrid memoir?" And then they started telling me about the genre of hybrid memoirs and how this is actually something that people do. You know, and it's becoming more and more common for people to do this. And so that's what I did. And it somehow worked. Like, I was able to weave my story with the story of housing history and policy in New York City. And it came out at such a time when, um, affordable housing is in the zeitgeist. Everybody's talking about affordable housing. We're at such a crisis level in the city. So it sort of came at a perfect time.
Well, thank you for segueing to my next question. So I talked about the election of Zoran Mamdani and how he's considered so radical now, but what if you compare him to the politics of the post-war period, that he's not really radical at all? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm all for his housing policy, absolutely, all for his affordability agenda. I mean, it's true. It's not radical. People are afraid of socialists, but it's absurd. It's like, this is just about trying to get people to be able to afford to live in the city. And it really is a decision that the government makes. The government can fund housing. The government funded. There was more public housing built in New York City than anywhere in the country. That was a decision made by progressive New York legislatures. And we can do that again. Um, it's not rocket science. It just takes political will. And it's not radical. It's what we need to do.
Well, it was accomplished by the progressivism of the legislatures and the willingness to use eminent domain, right? Which resulted in the creation of the Lincoln Center and of Stuytown and other
Right.
huge areas. And you said that we can do this now. Do you mean that it is possible for this to happen? Or do you think that this is something that we have the political will to do? Yeah.
Oh God, I have no idea. I mean, we need the federal government to also fund housing, and God knows, if that will ever happen. We at least need the governor to be behind it. We need to raise taxes to fund housing. We don't have to do it in the same kind of massive slum clearance that we did before. There's lots of places, there's still empty places where things can be built. So it doesn't have to be the same kind of situation. I mean, what happened with slum clearance post-war New York, I mean, a lot of it was that people post-war were fleeing to the suburbs. And so there was a lot of will to make sure that middle income people could stay and that working class people could stay and could afford to live and to build up the infrastructure of the city. So it's sort of a different kind of situation. New York now in many ways is thriving much more than it was post-war, especially in the 60s and 70s. You know, New York almost went bankrupt in the 70s. So it's a different landscape, but there's definitely room to build. And what we need to do is build like entirely affordable buildings, not this 80-20 model, you know, or not just have lotteries and hope that it shouldn't be based on a lottery, you
Well,
know.
I think what you're talking about now is that there are still some affordable housing options, but they're just there's so few and far between
Right.
that they work differently. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, that, like I said earlier, all the buildings on the Upper West Side and the West Side Urban Renewal, they were all affordable. All these buildings were completely affordable housing. It wasn't an 80-20 model. And there was NYCHA housing too. NYCHA housing went up first, and that was also even more affordable, right? That was for working class people. So we have to get rid of this model of making it like, okay, we can get an investor interested if, we, let them build 80%, market rate, and then we'll just, 20% for affordable, which isn't even really affordable because you sort of have to make a lot of money to even pay the affordable rent. So we need massive, massive construction, affordable housing construction, like what happened post-war.
Right. It seems like the biggest difference is that there was willingness to use eminent domain and seize large swaths of land and build housing. And now what the government does is incentivize the construction of some housing by private entities.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right.
What was pervert block?
There were these men who would sit on the stoops, on these tenement stoops, and they would like catcall at us when we were walking to school. And so we felt, we were scared.
And if we build more affordable housing, won't we just encourage that behavior?
Yeah, that is a good point.
We're speaking in sarcasm font right now. So I'm out of questions, and so before I throw it out to anybody in the room or on Zoom who wants to ask, I just want to ask you: is there anything else that you want to make sure that people learn about your book, about you, about housing?
Well, just that we really need to build more buildings like Mitchell-Lama buildings. It's a great model. There is actually something called Mitchell-Lama 2.0 that I have no idea the status of it, but it's something that is maybe gonna become law. I don't know. But there are things in the works, and let's cross our fingers and hope that Mamdani is successful in his drive to make New York City more affordable, to build more affordable housing. All we can do is like just hope that and participate, become active, but hope that he's able to realize his agenda.
All right, thank you. So, does anybody in the room want to ask any questions? Yes.
Yes. So you were saying before how she did a really nice job of combining history and her personal life. And I really love the way she kind of artfully wove in history. And one example that I was wondering if you could talk about was Nixon's trip to China and then the ping pong.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny because Marty, there's a film that's coming out called Marty's Supreme.
Yeah.
Which is all about this ping pong shark on the Upper West Side. So he was part of our landscape growing up. There was a big ping pong palace on the Upper West Side. But anyway, when Nixon went to China to try to open up relations with the country, part that China tried to kind of reciprocate was through ping pong diplomacy. So they had this touring ping pong team that went throughout the country. And they came to PS 75. They actually performed like their ping pong, show at PS 75. And we were all kind of blown away by that. And then because, like I said, the building was initially built for teachers, there was a teacher who taught at PS 75 who lived in the building. And he somehow organized a ping pong table to be put into the backyard of our building. And so we all played ping pong, and it was all kind of a result of Nixon going, to China, and then the ping pong people coming, and so it really was like the our building and the life in the community really kind of were one. It really became part of our experience.
I have.
Do you want to take Susan first and then we'll go to Andrew?
Sure.
All right, Susan, go ahead.
Hi, it was very interesting. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I was a little confused when you said that you had to leave, your family had to leave, but then you said there was another family that was able to stay. So, that was able to continue and the family was able to stay.
I think I know what you're talking about. There was a time, I think you said like there were kids who took over their parents' apartments.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so why were they able to do that and why were you not able to do that?
Well, so the only way I could have taken over my mother's apartment was if I had lived with her for 2 years before she died. I was a city resident. I was showing my tax return to the building. I was, paying taxes in New York City. And I wasn't doing that. I wasn't living in the city, so I couldn't do that. That's what happened.
And I mean, this is all, the whole thing has been a spoiler alert, but your mother died much like your father, like very suddenly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like she was sick and you knew like, oh, I can move into the
Oh.
building.
Right.
Oh, that's okay. That's too bad. And I have another question. Lincoln Towers that's also on the Upper West Side. Is that any part of Mitchell-Lama or anything like
No,
that?
it's not Mitchell-Lama. I mean, it looks like Mitchell-Lama. It tastes like Mitchell-Lama. No.
Right.
But
Well, when you describe the soot outside your building, there
Right.
actually it probably is a taste.
right. Right. It's not Mitchell-Lama.
Okay, that's private. And well, one thing I don't know how Mandami is going to be that successful with providing housing because right now land is so much more expensive than it was back in the 50s, 60s, early 70s. So the only reason some of the developers are making any kind of housing is because they are getting rents and then the 20% they're having for the lower income people. But land is so expensive. How do you think that that's going to work? I worked in the housing development administration for a while, HPD it's called now, and I worked in the rehabilitation department. That was one way that they tried to have more housing, especially in the Bronx. I don't know, I left a long time ago, so I don't know how successful it it turned out to be. But anyway, land is so very expensive. So what do you how do you answer that? You seem to think that it can be done, but I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, we just need a radical realignment of the way we operate in this country. There are other places in the world that build subsidized housing. They managed to do it. Paris, actually, there's a lot of subsidized housing in Paris. I'm sure that land in Paris is expensive, right? Vienna is a great model. Something like 75% of people who live in Vienna live in subsidized housing of one form or another. We just need to rethink how we do business in this country. You know, we can't continue having, you know, we're in a real crisis of homelessness. It's not just unaffordable housing, it's homelessness too. And it's, you know, reaching depression levels. So we just have to come up with something new. We can, it's expensive, but if you just not, if you stop thinking of it as, you know, as money, as that, like the land is expensive. So take that equation away and just, you know, there are community trusts that are kind of developing where the city's taking over buildings that have been abandoned. And so the question of how much is the land worth is out of the equation. And that's the kind of thing that we have to think of more of. Like on the Upper West Side, actually, there's the public library that I went to when I was a kid. It's on 100th Street between Amsterdam and Columbus. There's a project to build on top of the library. It's controversial. People are against it, of course, but it's an example. It's public land. It's a public library. You can build on it.
And
There's
there's
opportunity.
one more point I want to make. When you said, well, one way to do it is to raise taxes, that's not going to go over very well. So I,
Yeah, but I mean, it's
I'm
obscene
being a little
things.
negative about it, but I don't see. They're going to raise taxes. People are not
Well,
going to be happy about that.
I mean, I think there's a thank you for your question, Susan. It sounds like there's 2 points to this, and one is the nuts and bolts of how you get the housing done, but more importantly is the will to do it. And when you find, and to use a horrid expression, if where there's a will, there will be a way. Sorry, Andrew, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Janet. I love your book because it's an ongoing conversation.
Mhm.
And since the book came out, we have a new mayor, a lot of discourse, a lot of ideology. And a lot of the questions I had were much what Susan was asking in terms of like how you envision implementing this in a New York that is increasingly stratified and but I wanted to share an anecdote because again, book came out and the passage of time. So in August I met this professor named Caitlin Hill, okay? And she's been doing a lot of organizing around Chelsea NYCHA housing. So they're looking at the Fulton houses, Elliott Chelsea houses, and Amsterdam houses, and fighting I guess related companies, maybe the real estate corporation that's trying to buy those properties and get rid of them. So I asked if she had read your book, and she was familiar with it. She was really excited. So I connected you guys on Instagram, and hopefully you can.
Oh, I didn't just now?
Just now, yeah.
Oh,
Because I meant to do this in August, like ages ago. And so yeah, because she's continuing this fight on behalf of NYCHA and Chelsea. So like we're a little bit south of you guys, but she was familiar with it. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned it. And I was like, yeah. But yeah, so I was excited in that moment because her book is traveling in circles where these conversations are still really relevant.
Andrew, if anybody wants to get this book, where's what? Can you tell us a place where they can go to get it?
So there's this little website called Amazon.
Ah,
I'm getting there.
Weird flash, but okay. No, so on a bookstore nearby, Taylor and Phil Books. We also have some copies here that are available if you guys would like to purchase a copy. So again, my questions were a lot like Susan's. Well, I'm worried about just the privatization of everything that is happening, right? So I'm trying to think of what is really at stake now. Like housing, we've seen this gradually, but the thing that came to mind listening to you talk tonight was healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and those two things being really at risk, as well as other like public um, programs like that. And so how are you feeling? What are your thoughts on, like, will, you know, 10, 15 years from now, we be reading memoirs about, what it was like to have Medicare or Medicaid?
Oh, God.
Do you, you know?
Okay, so this talk just became a little dystopian.
No, we're not. No.
Okay.
No, I mean, no, we can't believe that we are. We have to believe that there's been such pushback. We have to believe. I mean, Mom Donnie just got elected, right? We have to believe that it's going to be better. We've got to. I mean, I can't. I know maybe it's the way my mother raised me, but she was like such a, you know, optimist. She was such a social justice warrior. She never stopped fighting the fight. I I can't believe that it's going to continue to decline like this. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, somebody shared an article with me yesterday. It's about a study done in the late 70s about to a group of men who were in their late 70s, and they recreated the conditions of their youth. And they did some studies of them before and after they went through this 2 week period where they lived like they were when they were teenagers. Like the housing was the same, the TV shows were the same, they were among the people their age, and and like they reported better health outcomes because they believed that they were back in their 20s again rather than in their 70s.
They have cell phones.
This was done in the late 70s, so I don't,
Okay.
so and objective observers like looked at before and after photographs and thought they looked younger after this experience. I bring this up because to reiterate your response, and that is, if you believe in progressive policies, you have to act as if you are still living in that time. We can't just bow to the forces of regression. And the fact that you believe it can have potential beneficial effect. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, but just on that, nostalgia is always usually not rosy, or it's a series of psych experiments that show people always, if you look at it, what actually happens, people look at the fact. But on another subject, because you were talking about eminent domain and supply of the housing, it's encouraging to see that commercial spaces are being converted into residential. It's small now, so it's only 10,000 units, but I'm wondering to what extent you mentioned eminent domain, of course, the office building. And I think it's an issue, it's not tenant clearing, right? It's not flood clearing. So it seems like New York is at least so far ahead in other metropolitan areas in terms of the, maybe because more people are moving back to the city, which would be a wall strike. Do you think that the conversion of commercial real estate could be something maybe the state could invest in and make that into modern housing?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great that vacant office buildings are being converted. I think that's a very good move. It's costly to do that, but I think it's a great idea to do that.
I think what Jonathan is suggesting is that it could be a way of achieving subsidized housing without having to buy land. Is that?
Yeah,
That was in the Wall Street Journal actually this week, was
Yeah.
a whole feature about not only the fact that it's happening at an accelerated rate in New York City, but the challenging logistics and sort of having to think outside the box. There's a building on Third Avenue that they literally had to cut a chunk out of the facade and out of the core of the building in order to make enough windows, make enough light entering the building to have bedrooms. Which is a huge, to your point, huge undertaking.
yeah.
And the plumbing and the logistics and like everything is complicated. But if the crisis is acute enough,
Then
and this is the resource that we have
right,
in excess, unused office space.
right,
Okay, cool.
Right, let's do it.
Let's do it.
right, right.
Yes, from an urban planning perspective, of course, unused office space may be very convenient. When you're on Third Avenue, there's a lot of businesses that you can walk to, and you don't necessarily have to put cloud and bridge fellow ground up here. You could have buildings that people could it doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can probably call the night.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Well, we had two chats that we missed.
It's a very long.
It's an extremely long one. So I'll just put it on the screen for everybody to see. And it's from Michael Dodo. Thank you for the talk. I really want the book. From 85 to 91, I was a child growing up in the Mitchell-on-Round B'ShERT city in Brooklyn, which incidentally, Donald Trump owned a piece of and once called the best tax shelter in the world. In the 80s, the Reagan administration took Starrett's management company all the way to the Supreme Court in violation of fair housing laws for privileging white families over others. In the 70s, the mandate was to stop white flight down the Belt Parkway and giving white people the best apartments of use. I guess was seen as the way. My family moved in the 90s to Staten Island, which was a culture shock. Sorry, this isn't really a question, but I feel like to be made Starrett City in those tensions, I just remember being an amazing place to grow up, full with green spaces and kids of all colors. Man's cognition not only reflects the objective world, but creates it. Lenin's notes on Hegel. Well,
Okay.
thank you.
So after you write your next book about moving back into the city, the book after that can be about Starlight City.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, I heard on the radio a while back, an interview, and this was like, you know, kind of in the middle of, it was sort of, I mean, COVID's not over, but like sort of late COVID era. And people are saying all these office buildings are standing empty in Manhattan. Why can't they be converted into housing? And the guy, whoever it was, I don't know who it was like, oh, you can't convert office buildings into housing. Like they're not set up right, and there's not enough windows, and and you can't do that. I was like, tell it to the artists who moved into the warehouses in Williamsburg.
Right.
I'm like, the artists at it.
Right.
Yeah.
They'll move in, they'll turn it into something, and then it'll be super cool, and then everyone will.
Want to move in. Right.
Creativity, I guess Mike and I read the same article. It's actually the creativity of the architects is bringing the light into these buildings and making these. So, you know, there's some artists.
All right.
So take care.
Zoomies, farewell. Thank you for joining.